has never been a more important time to move in a vegan direction. Whether you're ready to start, restart, or re-energize your vegan or plant-based practice, this podcast is for you. I'm Michelle Olander, life coach, vegan, ADHD matriarch, travel lover, and smoothie loather. And I know that it's the details that get in the way of your vegan journey. But I like to believe that the obstacle is always the way. So every week we meet here where I translate the tools of life coaching and Stoic philosophy. I bring you actionable tips, some laughs, interesting guests, and vegan ideas for everyone at any age. All to help you veg your best. Episode 243, Your Spring Vegan Reset. Hi, my veg your besties. I'm back. I'm back in Western Mass. I'm back in my dungeon, my basement, which I always like recording here better than anywhere else I am. And I end up being on the road quite a bit, recording the podcasts that go out to you every week. And I'm home, the place I consider home, the place that legally I pay all my taxes from, Western Mass. And you know, I was looking for this quote. Someone once said something about the real value of travel. It's not that we see things abroad. It's not that we see things different places, but how it changes us when we return home, how it helps us to see our own homes, our own communities, our own country with fresh eyes when we return. And we returned from France on Saturday, about eight days in France, mostly in Paris. And on Easter Sunday morning, we were up early, still jet lagged, and we headed out to visit some of the grandchildren. And that was great. So that was yesterday. And this morning, my husband and I found ourselves up very early again, especially for my husband, very early again, looking around the house and feeling that spring cleaning restlessness because we just haven't been here. And spring has been here for a while. I think it's like the last day or so of April when this episode drops. But we haven't been here. My husband and I have been kind of all over the place since all year, actually. But since early March, I had some medical treatment, which we'll talk about at some point on my thyroid. And to be honest, when we left for France about 10 days ago, it did not look much like spring here in Western Mass. But we've come back to all the daffodils, flowering trees, to be honest, quite a bit of yellow pollen on the cars in the driveway. But we have these fresh eyes also of having been in Europe, having been in France, and having been staying in comparatively sparse, empty hotel rooms, empty closets, empty cupboards, empty counters. And though, our home, we're very happy to be back in it. It's comfortable with almost 30 years of us here. I think, like probably most of you, we could do with a little less in the drawers and in our closets and on the counters. And this time of year is always just traditionally the perfect moment to refresh your home. For us here to refresh our home, but also the habits and the systems within our home, not just the stuff. And that can go for anything that you're trying to encourage in your life or to start in your life. And it's just as true if you're trying to be more active or more organized or more fit or more creative or to welcome new family members in, or if, like many of us here, you're trying to welcome a simpler approach to your vegan or your plant-based practice. Because how we create and maintain our daily vegan practice, and yes, it's a practice of choices we make 2, 3, 4, 5 times a day. It takes place within the space of our homes, within the space of our lives, or our offices, or our car in some cases, and certainly in our kitchens and in our closets and our medicine chests and in the cupboard that has all the cleaning supplies. These are all areas where our vegan practice, our plant-based practice takes place. So today's episode is about me and and a kind of late spring cleaning. You may be way ahead of me, but it's a spring cleaning in both our physical and in our mental spaces. And maybe it can also support your commitment to fine tuning something in your environment, to be a little more intentional, to be a little more in alignment with your values, with your goals, and to be more supportive of what you're trying to accomplish every day. So, part one, why your spring cleaning even matters on your vegan journey. Because spring cleaning can be very, very practical. It can just be the clearing of dust, organizing shelves, decluttering drawers. But when you're trying to live a more plant-based or a more vegan life, there is another intentional, maybe deeper layer, but certainly another layer. It's not just about what we see there, but what we keep and what is reinforced by what we keep that may sometimes undermine some of the choices we're trying to maintain or some of the choices we're trying to try on in the first place. And we've talked about this many times in other episodes. I think I have one called Curating Your Feed, and that's the idea that you re-examine what you are filling your life with. And that can be physical. It can be the food you are filling your life with. It can be the people you're filling your life with. It can be the activities you're filling your life with. And it can also be the information and the social media that you're filling your life with. And we've talked about it in the past that in my earlier parts of my vegan journey, I began to notice how some of the podcasts that I consumed, that I had been consuming, a lot of them had developed over on National Public Radio, I was reinforcing some of my older habits and choices. And I had listened for many years to a really great podcast, which I think was a public radio show, The Splendid Table. And also the one I really remember that I really enjoyed by Linda Palacio, who's a culinary historian that I really admired, called A Taste of the Past. And that show both of them actually centered a lot on food traditions and food ideas and food history and food, the technology of foods, but were mostly meat and dairy based. And though I wasn't cooking those recipes anymore and I wasn't eating those recipes anymore, I noticed that the repetition of those podcasts, the narratives within them, were reinforcing an older way of looking at food. It wasn't enhancing where I was now as a newer vegan, as a newer plant-based eater and cook. And I felt that those narratives made my old way of eating normalized, and it made being vegan feel more odd and strange, and unnecessarily so. So one of my earliest spring cleaning efforts on this path had been to reevaluate my digital space, and I unsubscribed from podcasts and newsletters that no longer aligned with my goals. I began looking for vegan athletes and chefs and nutritionists and thought leaders that did support the new information that I wanted to practice and take on and be more thoughtful about. And that one shift, looking at my social media feed, it changed not only what I heard every day, but it also changed how can I say this? It changed what seemed normal about my life and what I expected of myself. And it helped me to reimagine my identity, taking on different identities, declaring different identities as having kind of a tough time right now in the news and among certain thought leaders. But I do feel, as a woman who's almost 66 now, at different times of my life, I have had to create different kinds of identities to support myself as an academic, as a parent, as a community member, and yes, more recently as a public vegan. So part of creating that identity is to kind of put on the costume and create the stage setting, and that involves clearing your physical space to create a clearer lifestyle. And another layer of spring cleaning, most of us do, is that physical layer of looking at the fridge and the pantry and the drawers and the cookbooks and the cupboards. And for me, organizing isn't my superpower, but the hardest part was the mindset that process triggered. I had to face that powerful critical voice that was saying, honestly, it's wasteful. You bought it. So what difference does it make? You should be eating it because you bought it. You may know that I come from a long Yankee line. Even the non-Yankee side of my family is very, very concerned with waste. But over time, I was able to reframe this a little bit. I started to notice that keeping items that I no longer use or don't want to use wasn't really saving me money. It was costing me clarity. It was costing me focus. And it was keeping me just kind of a little, well, like a recent episode, vague. It was keeping me vague. So I began more of a ruthless process of letting some things go. And I donated unopened food items or gave them away to people I knew ate those sorts of things. I donated things that no longer fit our lifestyle. I gave away cookbooks, huge numbers of cookbooks that were focused mostly on animal-based recipes. I started removing roasting pans that really were only for meat products. And I had an old fish poacher, and I had these lobster crackers. I think you all can visualize what they look like, but they are the crackers, the items to crack the shell of those poor lobsters. They were in my kitchen drawers, and they weren't just tools. They weren't just items. They were actually reminders of a version of myself that I had decided to leave behind. And letting go of those objects made some space that I didn't need to fill right away, but it allowed some space that was there waiting for something new. And that gave me a lot more confidence, maybe, but clarity, a sense of ownership over how I was going to build my plant-based life. Now, I know some of us, not everyone in my family for sure is vegan, but my home is actually my home. And so I can keep it pretty much the way I want to. Some of you may have to share those drawers with people who are not okay with getting rid of some of those things. But there are probably spots where you can show that leadership and you can decide. And when I remind you, I'm reminding me. Small changes really can make big impact. And we sometimes poo-poo those small changes as if they're not enough or there's still so much that needs to be done. But you do not need to overhaul your entire home to feel that shift. You do not need to overhaul your entire diet to feel a shift. You do not need to overhaul all your purchases to feel a shift. That shift can happen with even small changes. And I highly recommend that if you are someone who is at all dissatisfied by where you are in any part of your goals, audit the media that you are surrounding yourself with. Whether they're podcasts, whether it's YouTube channels, newsletters, are they supporting your growth? Is what you're watching and listening to and reading and scrolling through part of your continuing education, or is it keeping you kind of numbed out in old thought patterns? Give that a little thought, no matter what your goal is, whether you are, but maybe you're fully vegan, but there's other parts of your life that are needing to be fine-tuned. Think about how your media is supporting or not supporting the new growth and the new direction you want more of in your life. Clean out a drawer or a shelf. What is more classic? I was watching television in France, trying to encourage my French on this past trip, and I heard what I call a junk drawer, referred to in French as un tiroir fourre-tout. Un tiroir fourre-tout, if I'm saying it correctly. So now that I've said that on my podcast, that entire French trip last week can be written off. I think the cost of the whole trip can be written off. But anyway, we all have a junk drawer, whether it's symbolic, whether it's in the bathroom, whether it's in the kitchen or in your office. We are holding on to stuff. It's not being used, that someone else could use, or that is actually unusable in its current situation. I threw out a lot of paper recently that had gotten, even back in a cupboard, had just gotten yellow and hard. And does that mean I'm just incredibly old, that my paper is that old that it's crumbling in the back of my drawers? A lot of that I put into my compost, and then I was like, oh, that might be too much. It's probably bleach and chemicals in that paper. All the same, we can do something better than have it taking up the oxygen and the space in our homes. And I also want to clear out items that reflect a you that never happened. I remember not too long ago, I got rid of a lot of beautiful books on needlepoint. I spent very little time needlepointing in my life, but a fair amount of time thinking about being a good needlepoint practitioner. And at one point I realized there were all these beautiful books on needlepoint in my office library. And they just represented a me that had never happened, a me from some other parallel universe. And those books were beautiful and someone else could enjoy them. So we all have some part like that, right? Clear out the items that reflect habits or ideas or goals that you've moved past. And we can also say goodbye to unused specialty tools like those lobster picks and shell crackers, lobster shell crackers that I was talking about a second ago. They actually, I know they were my mom's. I think they had actually come from my grandparents' house. They were very, very vintage looking. And you probably have items you no longer want to use. And that's worth honoring. And in the space that you empty, I like empty space, but you could also add a little something that is more resonant, something more beautiful. Maybe a fresh dish towel, a bowl of lemons, some plants that remind you of what you do want to be privileging in your life. Those visual cues can encourage you. They can be part of keeping you going and making this process seem less like what you're not doing and what you're giving up, and more like what you are doing and what you are getting a chance to do. Also, one of the things I suggest to everybody, you've seen me talk about it on Instagram. I've babbled on about it for years, but I'm not sure I've talked about it recently. I don't cook a lot. I don't do a lot of vegan recipes, but I have a go-to meal formula, which is as simple as a bean, a green, and a grain. And from there, I fill the plate with fresh or cooked produce, fermented foods I try to have on hand, nuts, seeds, whatever's seasonal and available. And you really don't need much of a recipe with that mindset, because a bean, a green, and a grain gives you a satisfying, protein-forward, vegan, plant-based plate. And then you get to use what's local, what's seasonal, what's delicious, what's in your freezer, what's in your pantry. Now, I know that many of us who are drawn to this lifestyle really resonate deeply with environmental concerns. I do. I think sometimes I had different competing ideas of what brought me to a vegan lifestyle, but what really keeps me here is the environmental concern. We believe in reducing waste. We believe in reusing anything we can. We believe in recycling. I compost. But sometimes that desire to avoid adding to the landfill ends up with us kind of turning our own homes, our own rooms, our own minds into landfills, holding on to items and ideas that no longer reflect who we are simply because we feel guilty about letting them go. Sometimes it's the sunk cost. Sometimes it's that it seems too late. Sometimes it's that we are, what if we need it later? What if we go back to eating animals? What if we change our minds? Or worse, what if we can't keep it up? It's worth examining some of those thoughts when we have anxiety about letting things go. But I don't think we want our homes to be landfills. So I know some of you like it when I give you a challenge or a homework. And I would say just 15 minutes this week. Maybe just choose one area, maybe your junk drawer. Un tiroir fourre-tout. Okay. Now I'm completely writing off that trip to France now. I've used the French term that I learned in France twice in this one podcast. So take 15 minutes with that junk drawer or that fridge or your media feed. Clear out one thing that no longer serves that version of you who's moving forward with a vegan practice. It could be a cookbook. It could be a roasting pan. It could be a butter dish. Maybe not a beautiful butter dish that you might be able to reuse in a different way. But you've got a plastic butter dish that you don't use in your refrigerator. Maybe that can go. Maybe somebody else could use that. Notice how it feels. Notice if it feels bad. If it feels really bad, don't do it maybe. But notice if it just feels like, what is that? Why do I think I can't get rid of those lobster crackers, those picks that I used to pull the meat out of those poor lobsters? Notice what's bothering you about it. Why would I want to keep it? Why would I want it to fill the drawer in my kitchen or in my pantry? Notice what shifts. This is what we do in coaching. We notice things. We don't ever force ourselves to do things we don't want to do, but we encourage ourselves to think some of those things through and to make room. Sometimes this is harder in midlife. In our early years, we pick up and go and we change addresses and maybe we need a bigger house for a family. But sometimes in that last half or that last third of life, some of these things feel like we're letting go of something and it doesn't feel like an opportunity. Let's talk about how it does feel like an opportunity, and let's stick with the things that do feel like an opportunity. And if you feel inspired, I'd love it if you shared a photo or a story, or you tagged me on Instagram at Veg Your Best. I'd love to see how you're refreshing your space and your practice this spring to be more vegan friendly, to be more plant-based. But remember, you don't need to do the complete reset. You don't need to change every single thing. You just need to start where you are and veg your best. Veg Your Best podcast production, music, and editing by Charlie Weinshank. Thanks, Charlie. Before you go, it would mean so much to me and the Veg Your Best team if you would hit subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, or share with someone you think might be interested. Something about algorithms, it helps bump us up a little in the rankings, and that's the best way to help others find the podcast and for us to find our audience. So, until next week, make it easy and veg your best.